From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Session 3 of the Cultural Heritage Archive Symposium. This session is entitled Preservation and Digital Stewardship. My name is Gene Deanna, and I head the Library of Congress's Recorded Sound section at the Packard campus for audiovisual conservation out in Culpeper. And I want to thank my city cousins here at the American Folklife Center for inviting me in today. My division, Motion Picture Broadcasting and Recorded Sound, is responsible for acquisition, processing, preservation, and stewardship of one of the largest audiovisual collections in the world, about 3.5 million sound recordings, published and unpublished, including radio broadcasts, and 1.4 million moving image items divided roughly equally between film and video. And as we've become more proficient at digital preservation, with things like robotic systems to digitize video cartridge formats and multi-stream capture audio systems and workflows, issues of stewardship are now at the forefront as real challenges that demand our attention and our resources. Cultural heritage collections are complex, and they're no less so when they're in digital form. This session looks to the field of cultural heritage archives for broad or specific views on active preservation and digital stewardship issues. For example, what are we doing to ensure the longevity of our digital collections? What tools are being used? What tools are needed? And which models currently work and which do not? The session chair is Michael J. Giaro. He is the digital library architect at Penn State University. His primary roles there are designing a technical architecture for durable access to the institution's digital assets, providing vision and strategy for the development of the architecture, building a development team, and fostering community around digital curation locally and abroad. In 2010, Mike co-founded Curate Camp, a series of unconference events, building community around the practice of digital curation. And in 2012, he served as program chair of the Association for Information Science and Technology's Research Data Access and Preservation Summit. He's been working in library technology since 1999, holding systems administration and software development positions, primarily in support of digital libraries and repositories at the Library of Congress, Princeton University, University of Washington, and Rutgers University. He earned both a bachelor's degree in linguistics and a master's degree in library and information science from Rutgers. Earlier this year, Mike published Academic Libraries as Data Quality Hubs, an article in the Journal of Librarianship and Scholarly Communication that explores the connection between libraries' traditional stewardship role and research data services on campus. The title Mike's given his presentation today is Building the Worlds in Which We Remember. Let me introduce Michael Giaro.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the panel, and thank you to all of you for being here, and of course the American Folklife Center and LC. I'm really stoked to be here today. I don't often get to speak to an audience like this. Frequently the folks that I'm talking to look and sound much like I do, tech folks, and so I really appreciate the breadth of this community. So I'm going to kick it off with remarks about how the topics of digital preservation and stewardship about them and about the fundamental importance of community, especially in the context of my work in digital preservation over the past few years. In my introduction, some words were said about my background. I'm a librarian, I'm a technologist, and I've been working in IT, in academia, and research libraries since 1999, primarily in the area of digital repository development. Currently, I'm Penn State's digital library architect, and my position is situated within Information Technology Services, or ITS, which is Penn State's central IT organization, in a department that collaborates with the university libraries on repository and data management services. So at Penn State, my role means I'm on the hook for the technical architecture and strategies I'm a periodically active software developer, and I also have a proclivity, as you heard, towards working within and building communities of practice. So today I'm going to tell you a story about me and my work over the past few years. Let's see, do I have, yes, there it is. About me over the past few years, not because my experiences are unique or even that remarkable, but rather because they reflect the reality of one person and one institution grappling with the real and quotidian challenges of the digital preservation and stewardship game. And my hope is that these will be generalizable. I share these experiences because I personally found quite valuable the lessons and strategies that I've learned over the years, and I hope that by surfacing these, you will confirm these, challenge them, and generally offer your own experiences in return. In 2008, a joint strategic planning initiative between ITS and the university libraries led to the creation of a shared program for cyber infrastructure, content, digital stewardship, and data curation, or Content Stewardship Program for short. The program was built to bring together the strengths of a large IT organization with a large knowledge management organization in the libraries in order to offer centrally supported services around digital stewardship. The program was driven both by federal funding agency requirements for data management plans and by faculty looking for better support for e-research or e-science initiatives. The program's first action was hiring complementary positions viewed as cornerstones to the success of the program. These positions were a digital library architect, me, to report up through ITS, and a digital content strategist or curator to report up through the libraries. The positions were strategically placed. The strategist reporting to an associate dean and me reporting to a senior director for IT, meaning that we both have privileged access to both the dean of libraries and the vice provost for information technology at Penn State, which sent the signal via organization structure that the Content Stewardship Program was both a new initiative and an important strategic initiative. The first project chartered by the Content Stewardship Program was to assess the library's strategy for delivering digital content. First, we selected a rubric for evaluating the delivery platforms in use. The rubric, which we adapted from work by Purdue and the University of Wisconsin, did comparing repository software, contained technical measures such as access control, metadata standards, and file format support, and general information such as the level of adoption of the software, the development community around it, and the customer support model. With the rubric in hand, we interviewed nearly 35 people throughout the IT and libraries and campus departments, including staff, faculty, and some graduate students, to learn what they thought of the platforms that they used, what they liked, what they didn't like, what they would keep in a replacement, what they would ditch. And what we found was that we had 4 applications to deliver digital content. 3 of the 4 were moribund, and none of the 4 offered content owners or curators the necessary tools to manage their content over time. That work was instead happening in other environments, such as desktop spreadsheets and copies of files littered throughout map network drives or burned to gold CD-ROMs and stuffed into dusty cabinets. Yeah. In short, there was a huge opportunity to improve the preservation of the library's investment in digital content. This review set us down the path of looking into tools and platforms for digital curation and digital preservation. In parallel, I was struggling with my new role. It's not exactly right, though. I loved my role, and it was the one that I had been looking to land for a number of years. What I was struggling with was an apparent lack of a national or international community of practice for folks like me. That is, repository architects and strategists. I'm a couple slides behind here. So I'm not sure how many of you can relate to this lack of a community of practice, not knowing your backgrounds. Perhaps you're fortunate enough to have an active, healthy, engaging community of your own. At any rate, I hope you can relate to this struggle. Prior to Penn State, I was a software developer at the Library of Congress, and before that held similar positions at Princeton and the University of Washington. I gotten very comfortable within my community of practice, or my tribe, which was Code for Lib, or Code for Libraries, a large self-organizing community with an established annual conference, an open access journal, a mailing list with over 2,000 colleagues, and more. At Penn State, I had found myself in a brand new role, a broadly defined and fuzzy role, and where had my tribe gone? Who could I lean on? Who could I bounce ideas off of? Who could I band together with? So I spent some time spread over a few months searching for it, and it turns out I already knew about 24 people who had roles similar to mine, even if their titles were different or their positions were placed in different parts of the org structure. And I decided, along with a close colleague and friend at the UC San Diego, at the University of California, San Diego, that we needed to build our own tribe. We brainstormed ideas about the scope, scale, and character of a new group and opened up the conversation to around 25 people with similar positions. The group came to the consensus that there was, in fact, niche to form a new community, and we started a series of events under the name Curate Camp. And the idea was to host a loosely structured event or unconference with the express purpose of building community in the digital curation domain, connecting architects, strategists, and technologists like me with subject matter experts, curators, bibliographers, archivists, catalogers, what have you. Since we formed Curate Camp in 2010, nearly 15 events have been held. I have to admit, I lost count because I disengaged for a while and other folks came along and ran with the ball for us. And the events have ranged in size from 25 participants to nearly 100, ranging in topics from curation tools to digital exhibitions, from preservation of audiovisual content to mashing up software developers with catalogers to see what would happen. It was awesome. Events have been held all over North America with attendees from countless walks of life. And the attendees are the real story about Curate Camp because they've driven the agendas, they've organized the events, and they brought real passion to each one. And I couldn't have imagined this sort of response back when we decided to form this community. I couldn't be happier about it. Digital preservation and stewardship, though clearly related to their analogs, are a new game, and that for me is exciting. But it's also been disorienting as we collectively define our new universe. Having a tribe has helped me realize that this is new for all of us. And that's okay, because we're in this together. It's the warm, fuzzy moment. I'm waiting for an awe. Thank you. If you don't have a tribe, build your own. And in so doing, you just might realize that you were surrounded by one all along. Armed as I was with a thriving community in Curate Camp, we back at Penn State set about exploring tools and platforms for digital preservation and stewardship. At the time, we were enamored of an emerging set of specs and tools that challenged long-held assumptions about digital preservation practices. Eager to apply this new technology to our digital preservation efforts, the Content Stewardship Program chartered a new project to gather use cases documenting the curatorial work being done within the libraries and university archives. In parallel, we learned more about this new set of specs and tools, tinkered with them, and sparked numerous discussions of the topic at events such as Curate Camp, on mailing lists, and on social networks, Twitter. When we finished gathering use cases, we learned not only how our curators were managing their work, we learned that they didn't consider themselves curators. And moreover, they hardly realized they had a community of peers within their own organization. In practice, the fragmentation caused by a one-off rather than architectural approach to digital stewardship not only meant we had different systems in place with their own particular workflows, but also that certain employees or entire departments were effectively siloed. With the curator's use cases documented, we built them a prototype for deposit, description, auditing, and version management of digital assets, building on top of the aforementioned emerging specs and tools. The prototyping experience was a positive one, and there were two lasting impacts of the prototype, despite the short life and the narrow scope of the prototype. Those are that, first, we successfully raised awareness of the effect of siloization, if you will, by connecting curators with one another across structural and technological boundaries. And second, after presenting our prototype during a well-attended poster session at Open Repositories 2011, we were forced to reevaluate our technical direction based on the excellent comments, questions, and challenges from those who stopped by to talk to us about our poster. Though we were able to produce a prototype based on these tools in a little over 4 months, we found that these tools are more compelling. We found these tools more compelling than some alternative technologies, and yet we ultimately decided that for scale and sustainability purposes, it was more important for our institution to align digital preservation efforts with that of a larger, more active community. Leaving aside the technical reasons for adopting a new set of technologies for building digital preservation services, there were other, compelling reasons to align our efforts at Penn State with those of an established, growing community. The community I'm referring to is the Hydra Project, a collaborative of institutions, largely cultural heritage institutions, working together since 2008 to develop repository services based on a common architecture and common open source software. Hydra's focus on community was attractive to Penn State, primarily for sustainability purposes. We could have waited for our community to accrete around the prior technological choice that we made, or we could have built it all in-house. But we were more confident about sustaining this work, somewhat important if you're doing digital preservation, you might think, knowing that a growing number of institutions were adopting the same technologies and in fact committing to sustaining the software and the very community that was built around them. Because Hydra already had an established base in the form of a core platform and common middleware, there was also a scaling rationale behind our decision to adopt Hydra. Our developers could focus on building web-based interfaces for our customers rather than building infrastructure. That is, we could scale up user-facing services more quickly, not to mention more sustainably, than if we decided to build from the ground up or base our efforts on less mature or less well-adopted technologies. Since we adopted Hydra in early 2012, we have developed 2 new production services. The first one is ScholarSphere. This is Penn State's institutional repository for durable access to scholarly works and data. And the second is ArchiveSphere, currently in development, and it's a preservation repository for university archive staff to manage their digital archival holdings, including electronic records. It's not related to archive space. We were kind of a casualty of our own branding campaign here. Choosing Hydra required us to train our technical staff in new technologies and required us to work in largely new ways, such as one, working out in the open with many eyes on our source code, since Hydra is an open source project, considering the impact of our work on other institutions, meaning that we not only allow greater access to our code, but that we contribute back to core components, thus giving back to the community and our fellow partners. And 3, coordinating our work with other Hydra partners so that we can divide work among our institutions, align our timelines, and effectively share resources. This was particularly important because few institutions, in my experience, have the resources to do this sort of work alone in a way that scales and can be sustained, or at least Penn State doesn't, and so the shared development that occurs in the Hydra community allows us to do more with less. The community's reaction to ScholarSphere and ArchiveSphere has been extremely positive, and in fact, a group of developers extracted functionality from ScholarSphere into a new open source component called Sophia, it's Japanese for sphere, again, with the marketing, so that other institutions could more easily bootstrap their own repository applications. SOFIA is based on the work that we did with ScholarSphere. It's now in production at 5 institutions, with around 10 more institutions working on adopting it or planning to adopt it. Needless to say, we're now in a very different place than we were a few short years ago when Penn State was more or less invisible in the digital preservation community. And much of this success is due to our alignment with a growing community. In the time since Penn State joined the Hydra project as a partner in June 2012, the community has more than doubled in size, from 9 partner institutions up to 20, the latest being announced around last week, with even more coming. I can't state strongly enough how much mileage we've got out of putting community, whether at the local, organizational, or national level, ahead of other concerns as a fundamental strategy for sustaining digital preservation and stewardship services at Penn State. I'd be interested in hearing how this matches your experiences. Thank you. So now I'm going to introduce my co-panelists, and after they're done making their presentations, I'll kick off group Q&A with a question. By then, I know y'all will have your own questions to ask of either the group as a whole or particular speakers. We ask that you do hold your questions until all speakers have finished their presentations. We have plenty of time for discussion. First up is Ahmed Samir, Director of the Enterprise Applications and Integrated Solutions Department at Biblioteca Alexandrina. He will be speaking about digitization approaches for homogeneous and heterogeneous collections. Second is Alan Burdette, Director of the Archives of Traditional Music and the Director of the EVIA Digital Archive Project. He will be speaking about IMPAC, I-M-P-A-C, the Archives of Traditional Music, and a collaborative Indiana University strategy for saving its media holdings. Third is Janel Quirante, Head Archivist at Ulu Ulu, the Henry Ku'ualoha Juni Moving Image Archive of Hawaii. She will present a case study about preserving Hawaii's moving image history through digital archiving. Fourth is Gulnara Aitpaeva, Director and founder of the iGene, is that right? iGene. Cultural Research Center, as well as the founder of both the Kyrgyz Ethnology Department at American University in Kyrgyzstan and the Department of Cultural Anthropology and Archaeology at American University Central Asia. She will be speaking about placing the epic manas into the contemporary world through digitization. Fourth is Carl Fleischauer, Project Coordinator in the Office of Strategic Initiatives, the Library of Congress. He'll be providing an update on the federal agency's Digitization Guidelines Initiative. And our last speaker will be Maurice Mengel, a doctoral candidate at the University of Köln, who previously worked in the ethnomusicology department of the Ethnological Museum in Berlin, also known as the Berlin Phonogram Archive. He will present an essay concerning the digital revolution and the state of digitization, how ethnomusicology archives have to do more with less. And with that, I yield the floor to Ahmed Samir.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ahmed Samir, and I'm currently leading a team of software engineers, which is responsible for software development at New Lab of Alexandria, Biblioteca Alexandrina. First, Biblioteca Alexandrina is not just a library. It's a complex structure that contains the Internet Archive, several special libraries, exhibitions and museums, illustration lab, arts, science, and several different initiatives such as Discussion d'Egypte, l'Art Arabe, Arabic Digital Library containing more than 230,000 books fully available online, digital archives such as Gamal Abdel Nasser Archive, Business Archive, Canal de Suisse. But today I'm going to talk about digitization approaches for homogeneous and heterogeneous collections. What I mean here by homogeneous collection, that a collection came from one source with one standard, passing through a single workflow. And the heterogeneous collection is a collection gained from several sources with several workflows. Using two case studies here. I will start for heterogeneous, then homogeneous. For heterogeneous collections, my case study here is Memory of Modern Egypt. Memory of Modern Egypt is a larger project, contains more than 4 million digital items describing the modern history of Egypt from 1798 to 1981. It's collected over 150 sources, different sources. These 14 types varies from images, videos, speeches, audio files, maps, articles, stamps. And due to the complexity of here, this is the model. As we can see, we have the 14 different types and 5 main themes controlling the 14 different types here: rulers, prime ministers, events, subjects, and public figures. So to talk into the data model, this is our 5 main themes, which should be connected to the 14 different types and associated with the using keywords, publishers, and extra metadata needed to complete. Here, workflow, we have 2 types of workflows. The first for the born digital collections. Many institutes and universities provide us with their data already digitized. Each collection came with its own format, with its own metadata standard. It should all combined and inserted into our own repository. And other collections are digitized on site or into Bibliotheca Alexandrina, where we build digitization facilities on sites and develop the required backends. Here we face the problem of data integrity, which working with different standards, metadata standards, reflect in combining them together, especially in Arabic. Arabic has a huge problem here, as it's a complex language where the word could be described by several formats and several letters. So there's a major problem here came into the data cleaning process. Especially, I'm not talking about a scale of hundreds or thousands. I'm talking about a scale of millions of objects. We built several solutions here to solve the duplication problem and the metadata integrity. This is samples of memory from the Egypt collections. Some come governmental sources, such as Egyptian SIS or National Postal Authority. Some are famous publishers in Egypt and worldwide, as Al-Hilal, or special collections for families, as President Sadat family or Mohammed Mahmoud Basha collection. Repository presentation here, such a project you can access via modernegypt.org. As you can see here, I'm afraid the interface in Arabic, so I am going to pass it faster. The English version on way. It will be published within 3 or 4 weeks. Okay, the 5 main themes and the 14 different types, where we search by facets, have a timeline to narrow the search, build our own image viewer to be work on slow connections in Egypt and in developing country. We face a problem for connections and high-speed connections. So the same, we build map viewers, our document viewer, and we implement morphological search within content. All content here fits into the OCR process where we extract data and we apply searching morphological here. Going to talk about second case for the homogeneous, which is Dar al-Mahfuzat or Egyptian National Archive. Okay, Egyptian National Archive is coming back to the year 1805, established by the ruler Muhammad Ali. It has more than 20 million pages. Already digitized 4 million pages of this collection. It's in Arabic, English, French, Somali documents, different languages, colored and black and white. Different types from sonic books, public shop registrations, birth certificates. So this case is much simpler than the previous case of memory of modern Egypt. As it's simply, it's a file, each file contains its documents and its sub-documents. Just we define the documents and associate it with its metadata in a single flow working here. The workflow here built on classification units, responsible on the classification, entering the metadata, doing the digitization, and finally making the matching to ensure that the metadata entered are matched correctly with its digital objects. And of course, there is an error pass for error correction. These are sample snapshots of the application already implemented in the library, implemented by our team. Data integrity here. For homogeneous collections, there is no actual, even for larger collection, problem in data integrity, data cleaning, as it's a single flow. If we're moving into it, we wouldn't face the problem of collection came with the standard and another collection and combine them. repository presentation here is still under constructions. Mainly authorized access levels due to the confidentiality of the data. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Alan Burdette, and there we go, I have some slides. I'm director of the Archives of Traditional Music, and what I want to do in my presentation is to tell you a story. It's a story about a recognition of some challenges, the development of a vision, and our strategies to arrive at some solutions to these challenges that we faced. But first, a little bit of history about who we are as the Archives of Traditional Music. And the Archives of Traditional Music is primarily an ethnographic sound archive, about 2,500 or so field collections, about 100,000 objects in total, primarily audio materials, but a variety of video, photographs, paper materials as well. And our scope is very international. We're particularly known for Native American and African materials, but we have things from all over the place, and things that are not just ethnographic in nature. Our collections run the range of a variety of disciplines centered on ethnomusicology and folklore, linguistic anthropology, and as well as a large collection of materials in popular and traditional music. And like many cultural heritage archives, much of our time is spent serving researchers and patrons from all over the world, helping them find collections to do their research projects, to connect their interests with the materials that we have and put them in a form that they can use. And those patrons are international in scope. We serve people from all over the world. So about 10 years ago, we embarked on a project in conjunction with Harvard University to address the preservation challenges of our holdings. And that project, Sound Directions, began, as I said, about 10 years ago. And the goal of that project was to take the emerging standards for digital preservation at the time and develop best practices to see what they look like on the ground and what they would look like in workflows, and to develop some software to do that. And as this project, by the way, was funded by the NEH and was renewed a few times. And over the course of those renewals, we developed a workflow and a kind of a pace of digitally preserving our holdings. And so once we had done this for a while, we began to do some math. And what the math that we did was to look at our holdings and say, okay, at this pace, how long will it take to do our holdings? And for us, that number was about 60 years. And for our colleagues in the School of Music Library, which is the other collection holdings on campus that were even larger than us, that number was about 120 years. So knowing what we knew then, this was back in 2009, that the prevailing wisdom and what we knew was that, we've got about 15 or 20 years. That window, due to obsolescence and degradation, we've got about 15 or 20 years, that this was not a solution that would work for us. Grant funding was not going to be the way that we could preserve our holdings. It wasn't going to be even close to facilitating the preservation of our holdings. And the situation, as it became very clear to us at that time, was that these forces of obsolescence and degradation meant that all video and most audio formats were endangered, that digital preservation was the only option we had available to us, that preservation could not function as the passive process that it had in the past, that it needed to be an active process, and an active process that engaged larger institutional structures of technology than just our archive. And that meant collaboration. And that collaboration was necessary in order to achieve this. And that born digital recordings, we weren't even talking about that so much then, but these also had immediate preservation and documentation needs. So we had to come up with a vision for how we would do this. And that vision emerged as we were contacted more frequently by other units on our campus who said, we've got this collection we need to preserve, can you help us? And we could only do so much. We couldn't help everyone, but we began to realize that, well, if there are other collections on campus facing this problem, what happens if we try to pool our resources? So we began to hold a series of events. We put together a small working group. We put together a series of events that began to talk about the issues of preservation, to educate other units who may have had audio collections or video collections but did not have expertise in those areas, to lay out the issues of preservation and to find out what their concerns were about access and about managing their holdings. And it emerged that we really needed to know what was on our campus. And from that, we were able to get support to conduct a survey or a census of what we had on our campus. And that we spent a year looking at all of the units on our campus. We visited 80 different units on campus, everything from the School of Music Library to the Department of Sociology with a dozen tapes in a closet, or all manner of collections on campus. And there were a lot of things on campus. And through this survey, it gave us the ground from which to propose something larger. This is a list of at least the 50 known formats that we discovered during the survey. You can get a sense of what we're facing. So we were able, through that leverage, to get funding for a planning phase from which we developed, we created a task force, we began to build consensus among the units on campus, and began to analyze that data and look at what that meant. And the result was another report, a planning report that laid out a series of preservation issues, principles for preservation and access, and fundamentally a plan for a centralized facility to preserve the media on our campus. These reports are available online. You can find them if you Google Media Preservation Initiative in Indiana. You'll find them. We have a blog where we're regularly updating information. So the impact is the center that is being proposed, and what's being proposed is a high-capacity, a center with two parts, a high-capacity portion that's run by a vendor with parallel workflows, and another part that's run by IU for fragile and high-risk formats. And now we're talking about a window somewhere around 10 years before it becomes very, very difficult to do this work. We have a plan on the table, and I wish I could give you a definitive answer, but we can't just yet. But what's on the table right now is a 5-year plan to digitize about 380,000 objects. We're evaluating a vendor proposal. We expect an announcement soon, so watch your various media outlets. And we're doing active prioritization based on format risk as well as research value. And all of this is going to require, when and if this becomes a reality, collaboration between our technology infrastructure, our libraries, the vendor doing this work, doing several thousand objects a month, and all of the various special collections on campus who have these media holdings. So I'm happy to talk with all of you later about more about this plan and where things stand, but that's what's going on in Indiana at the moment. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Janel Quirante, and I'm the head archivist at Ulu Ulu, the Henry Ku'uloha Juni Moving Image Archive of Hawaii. And I've got, let's movie time. I've got some nice footage from the islands to share with you all today as I read about our or talk about the pilot project that we conducted from 2009 to 2011. Ulu Ulu is Hawaii's official state archive for moving images. Located on the University of Hawaii West Oahu campus, the archive is dedicated to the care, preservation, and digitization of film and videotape related to the history and culture of Hawaii. Ulu Ulu is a Hawaiian word meaning collections, assembly, or gathering. Our archive is not just a collection of moving image items, but also an assembly of voices, communities, and stories, a gathering place for people to share Hawaii's culture, traditions, and collective memory. The footage that you are watching comes from our pilot project, which was a collaborative effort from 2009 to 2011 between Ulu Ulu and local museums, archives, libraries, television stations, and independent producers to create a representative digital collection of Hawaiian film and video. The content digitized during the project was varied and included unique, historically and culturally significant footage, much of which had not been seen in over 30 years because of lack of access copies or working playback equipment. The footage shows images of local special events and daily life in Hawaii, including canoe racing, Portuguese bread baking, preparing kalua pig in an imu or underground oven, poi making, hula kahiko, lei making, opihi picking, and paniolo on the Big Island. This reel highlights just a few examples of the rich cultural heritage resources discovered during the pilot project that had not previously been readily available to the public. The goal of the pilot project was to develop and test workflows and procedures for the cataloging, preservation, and access of collection materials in order to lay the foundations for a long-term and fully operational archive. 13 participants selected items from their collections to be digitized based on uniqueness, physical condition, and clear copyright ownership. Participants submitted in total approximately 300 hours of footage on 452 individual items of various audiovisual formats, ranging in dates from 1928 to 1998. Videotape formats included 2-inch quad, 1-inch open reel, half-inch EIAJ, 3/4-inch U-matic, Betacam SP, and VHS. Film formats included Super 8, 8mm, and 16mm. Audio formats included audio cassettes and electric transcription discs. For cataloging, Ulu Ulu used a media asset management system specifically designed for audiovisual materials, and which also functions as the central database of all our acquisition, preservation, and digitizing activities. Ulu Ulu customized modules and features according to our collection needs, and developed a streamlined cataloging workflow with specific actions that include collection acquisition, accessioning, export and import of metadata from digitization systems, refining of catalog records, and creation of title hierarchies. Ulu Ulu developed a 3-tiered digital video preservation strategy during the pilot project, in which we create 3 levels of digital video files from each analog source, the intent being that multiple file formats will create a safe redundancy of content as technology continues to change. The 3 levels of digital video files are a preservation level file, which is a high-quality uncompressed or lossless compressed file as close to the original source as possible for long-term storage and for future migration if needed. An intermediate level file, which is a high-resolution, lossy compressed file to be used for staff access and editing for immediate use and long-term storage. And an access level file, which is a low-resolution compressed file to be used for public access via the internet for immediate use and short-term storage. The pilot project also saw the launch of Ulu'ulu's website, ulu'ulu.hawaii.edu, which is the main public access portal to the archive's collections. It is freely available with no login or user verification required to search the catalog, watch streaming video clips, browse collection content within staff-curated theme pages, and interact with the archive through social media links. Ulu'ulu's cataloging database provides the backbone for the site's search and browse capabilities, with XML exports used to define and structure the searchable metadata fields and appearance in the individual media asset pages. During our pilot project, Ulu'ulu used specialized software and digitizing equipment found nowhere else in Hawaii and created standard processes for cataloging, preservation, and access, adhering to archival best practices for audiovisual materials, yet implemented in a way that makes sense for Hawaii's unique preservation challenges. The lessons learned from the pilot project may offer a model for other organizations undertaking similar digitization and preservation projects. And these are just the participants who worked with us during the pilot project and who submitted all of the footage that you just watched today. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gulnara Aitpaeva. I came from Kyrgyz Republic, which is located in Central Asia. And as a person who came from far away, I would like to start from gratitude words. I would like to thank, first of all, Katie Kirst. It's the main person who actually made possible my visit here. Thank you very much, Katie. And I would like to thank John for a technical support and for providing all this stuff. Thank you so much. I am from Aygine Research Center. Aygine, translating from Kyrgyz, means clear, and also a process making something clear, a process of clarification. And today, and our research center works on traditional knowledge, sacred geography, and the epic heritage. And today I would like to talk about the placing the ancient Kyrgyz epic into the, can I see that? Through digitization. Okay, I'm trying to, okay. The ancient Kyrgyz epic Manas is the pivot and the core of the entire Kyrgyz cultural and epic heritage. And to give an idea when it came into existence, I would tell that about 18 years ago, in 1995, Kyrgyzstan, on the state level, celebrated the 1000th anniversary of the epic. And in the previous years, scholars, archivists, and other people used to tell that the epic Manas is the greatest one. It's the largest one in the world. It contains a vast folk knowledge, and it has the encyclopedic nature. But what I would like to stress here is Manas is a living and actively evolving epic. It didn't pass away like other world epics. It does exist and, as I told, actively evolve. Here you can see a few Manas reciters, and yeah, there is a community, and it consists about 15-20 people who are able to recite. It's a trilogy, who recite the trilogy, and the long version which I heard in my experience, it's 12 hours, 20 minutes with no breaks, and it lasted for 7 days. And John, could I ask to, yeah.
Oğarıp kalgan taytorun sürüp bir aylanayın kudundum. Hebi içinden gelgen almam bet. Omunun cahil sürrasan. Çılavanın tukumu çırga tuğan uçundu. Karagangay tukumu kakışka tuğan uçundu. Jiri kıtay tukumu çekege tuğan.
So it goes like that for many, many hours. And now you can see pictures of some well-known young monastics. And new, very young monastics appear, and some girls are among them. You can see that. And the youngest one, which is getting very famous now, it's Umut. Umut is translated from Kyrgyz as hope. And you can see him, he is 5 years, and he is able to recite not for 5-10 hours, but for some hours now. So, I mean, on one hand, it's, as I told, it's a living tradition, and we have a community which preserves and maintains the epic heritage. And the epic manas has been used and is being used very actively by diverse public figures, including politicians. And when we became an independent country, it was the attempt to use the epic heritage as the basis for building ideology. But on other hand, we have been experiencing many problems with the epic manas. And when we started working with contemporary reciters, we found out that nobody actually documented, nobody actually worked directly with these young and not young people. We have about 80 written versions in the archives of the Academy of Science, but no one no one contemporary. So observing the situation, we took a decision to try to get funds and to make a contemporary version of the epic. Also, there is a serious gap between a community maintaining and preserving the epic and the listeners. Kyrgyz used to tell, if there is no a proper listener, epic would die. And in attempt to overcome this problem, we decided to make a digital version of the epic. So it was made. We started in it's a trilogy, and we started in 2010. Sorry, and we made the first volume, which consisted 25 hours of recitation, and 13 contemporary modern reciters were involved in this project. There is a small brochure in Kyrgyz language which presents the case studies, the life stories, why and how they started telling the epic, because it's usually about spiritual call, it's about very hard illnesses, and about the learning through the not from the books, not from the films, but through other sources like spirits, dreams, and so on. And then a year ago, we produced a second volume. It is a second part of the epic. It's 26 hours. And I would like to give both of these books to the Library of Congress as our contribution in your collection. Here you can see a filming process. Filming process, the core episodes, everything was done in a close collaboration with the community of reciters. It was fully participatory research, because otherwise it would not be successful. And it is the version which I just showed. And why it is important to have a digital version of the contemporary version? Because of many reasons. First of all, it's academic research. As I told, we don't have, there is no one serious research on contemporary version, how it does differ from the classic ones, what was damaged in the epical knowledge, what are new components. So it's a serious challenge and call for the scholars to start such kind of research. Also, as I told, Manas is a very popular topic in the country, and it was introduced a year ago as obligatory course at all schools, at secondary school, at high schools. And Kyrgyzstan is such an interesting country, it could introduce something with no preparation to implement. So our collections is the main tool now to be used for such kind of courses. Also, it's a very important tool for informal education, because young people who who are called to recite Manas, they need to have something and to learn face to face. So it's a tool or a way for them to use this digital version. Also, Manas was used in the previous times, and it still is being used as a healing tool, which is a separate topic. And one more, it's recreation. Many people, especially traditionally oriented people, they need to listen the epic just for spiritual recreation, for spiritual recharging. So there are many tasks which we were able to meet implementing this project. So there is a clear and obvious connection between sacred geography and the epic, and here you can see the moment of recitation in the field. And there is this last slide and a poster, a small one, which you could take from the table in the corridor. There is 13 people who live in our country and who do this recitation of the Manas. And the circle is just showing that Manas has not disappeared like other epics. It does exist, and it's directly connected with ethnic and national identity of the Kyrgyz people. Thank you very much.
This conference as a whole and this session is actually kind of fun, and it varies between the rich human experience that we just heard about, which is quite wonderful, to what I fear is perhaps interesting but a little more arid and not nearly as rich and human in its way. The Federal Agency's Digitization Initiative, we call it FADGI for short, goes back to 2007. There's actually two working groups there, one for still images and one for audio visual. And the game here is to get multiple federal agencies together to try to come up with some common guidelines. And that's something, in some cases, it's actually real helpful with vendors, because you'd have more uniform contracting and so on. We've done some other things in addition and work on tools, as I'll say in a moment. There are 18 official participants. Some of them are more active than others. The National Archives and the Government Printing Office, interestingly, have been pretty active. And we also get outfits like the National Park Service and the Voice of America and the Smithsonian to pitch in. The emphasis, as I said, is on digitization and digital reformatting. There's a still image group that looks at things, for example, like scanning books, photos, and maps. My own contribution is more with this audiovisual group. And the audiovisual group is, of course, interested in digitizing, but also we have found ourselves, as some speakers here have signaled, confronting the problems that arise with born digital, especially born digital video, which is clearly a hot topic these days. Each of these working groups meets about 4 times a year. I won't read all of this. There's a couple of slides that give you sort of a high-level overview of what some of our outputs have been over the last 4 years. Some conceptual frameworks at a pretty high level, special studies and tools regarding capture device performance, which has been a point of particular interest. There's a general still image guideline. Some work on metadata, although our emphasis is really on technical metadata, things like file headers and embedding. And there's a couple of efforts now to compare formats, one for stills and one for video, trying to see what the pros and cons are of digital formats there. And then we've had another sort of biggish one that pins down variables for the preferred video preservation format here at the library. Since that was all pretty high level, although this is sort of a little techie section, I thought it would be useful just to illustrate with an example to give you a sense of what's in the thick of these things. When we specify technical parameters for still images, we're hoping to move away from some of the past parameters, color versus monochrome, pixel density, and bit depth. These specs are usually referenced to outputs, what you do with the image you have. We want to be looking more at some appropriate ways to specify tonality, spatial resolution, color, uniformity, and so on. And there's a framework online to help think through what's needed. Broadly speaking, as the big notes at the top say, it's all about signal and noise. This 8-page document includes some additional tables and explanation. And I thought I'd just say a word or two about one of the elements, SFR, or spatial frequency response. This is a matter of rethinking resolution. All of us, me included, have had a tendency to talk about pixels per inch delivered by a scanner as if it were the resolution. But we really come to see that that's not thinking about it the right way, and that's not the right metrics, or it's only part of the set of metrics that you need to look at. So our rethinking has got us to a trio of terms that we sort of work with together. One of them, sampling rate. That's what the scanner's pixel count really ought to be called. It's an image made up of dots, and the dots are produced by a scanner, and that's the sampling frequency as it samples the image. Resolution has to do with the optical delivery of the fine details in the image, and it's determined by some metrics that are in some ISO standards for what is called spatial frequency response. If your scanner's SFR numbers are high enough, then a 600 ppi sampling rate is an honest statement of what's being delivered. If your SFR is low, though, the scanner is kind of lying to you. You're not getting a true 600. You can compare the two numbers as a percentage and come up with something called sampling efficiency. And that's something that we've focused on as we've developed these FADGI guidelines. I'm hoping that this will be online in the presentation, and folks that come back to this slideshow can follow these links to some blogs that one of my colleagues wrote that will explain some things, I hope, in a more helpful way than I can in this compressed talk. The overall guideline at the website includes the idea of organizations judging how critical a job is, about the levels of quality that are needed for this task. We're using the terms 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, and so on, according to kind of the importance or criticality of it. And in the table, the green column gives you the aim points, what you're shooting for. The pink columns provide tolerances at each level. So here's the one for SFR. Your aim point is 100%. 4-star, you got to get 95. For 1-star, you could drop to 80, and so on. In order to check out whether you've got these levels, we've tried to put some tools together. There's a combination of some device targets. Big one is really for the devices. Actually, the skinny one can be next to an object that's being scanned. They're both about 10 inches long. And they measure different features on the object. The sharp edges on this that are highlighted in red are used for SFR, and the software that exists then reads the images of the targets and presents the results. So here's an example in which the SFR is about 800. The tabs at the top show you all the other things that the software helps you measure, and the outcome is that you can see if your scanner is working properly or you can test to see how your contractor's equipment is working. So sorry to have dipped that deep in the weeds, but I hope it helps just give a little sense of sort of what I'll call the flesh and blood of the kind of guideline work that we're doing. Thank you.
In my last project, we first made some pictures with without calibration and afterwards with calibration, and showing the difference really convinced my superior that we really have to do it. I'm here to talk about ethnomusicology archives, like the one Alan already introduced, and I like to give you kind of a personal, subjective opinion. I suspect that ethnomusicology archives are really pretty much like other archives, especially other audiovisual archives, audiovisual research archives, but ethnomusicology archives are the ones I know, so that's why I talk about them. I'm really grateful to be here today because taking part in this session allows me to bring up two topics that are important: a slightly historical perspective on archives and a reflection of new technologies in ethnomusicology archives. Basically, what I want to do today is I'd like to suggest a thesis for discussion. And I hope I can move the slide. Yeah, that's basically the thesis. If we compare our archives with the state they were in before digitization, then today we probably have more ambitious goals and we have a lot more work to do. But we have only about the same, or possibly less, resources than we did back then. As I see it, digitization in a broad sense began in ethnomusicology archives in the 1980s and quickly affected all major domains of archiving. The first phase of digitization was tumultuous and radical. We saw a quick succession of new technologies that were quickly superseded by yet another innovation. Often these changes were disruptive. The introduction of a new technology required that most of the archive staff had to learn new concepts, new skills, and new workflows. For many archives, digitization meant, and often still means, a steep learning curve and quite a bit of frustration. I think that for a few years, this early phase of rapid change is over, and that we are now in a more stable period of moderate change. Why? Because, firstly, the time for basic research is long gone. There are already standard solutions for all the domains of a digital archive. We know how to collect digital porn recordings. Theoretically, we know how to preserve digital files, at least in theory, etc. Of course, not all questions are answered yet, but we are now in a period of more incremental improvements, of increasing efficiency, of finding more appropriate solutions for the more unusual cases. In a word, today changes are less disruptive. Also, I think that inside the ethnomusicology archive community, there's generally awareness of how digital archives should operate. Yeah? Let me just mention the openly available and widely accepted standards like YESA TC04. But still, most ethnomusicology archives continue to struggle with the digital revolution. Some examples. It is the norm and not the exception that archives do not have the funding to digitize all of their collections, even given several decades in which to do it. Moreover, many archives do not even have a serious, realistic, or up-to-date plan of what they can digitize in the next 20 years or so. It is the norm and not the exception that ethnomusicology archives have insufficient and incomplete information about their own collections in a digital form. Often enough, the information they do have is in a less detailed, less organized, or less accessible form than in the days of paper or card catalog. True, such gaps in the digital documentation usually exist only for parts of the collection, but they're more frequent than one might think. In effect, it seems that many archives have already stretched their resources so thin for so long that accomplishing a bare minimum has become the new normal. That's basically what I said. So digitization, of course, also means that we can do a lot more than we could do in the past. As you probably all know, in the past, all we could do was to preserve slowly deteriorating analog media that would eventually turn into dust, quite literally. In the digital era, we should finally be able to do what we were probably always meant to do. We can actually preserve audiovisual content for all eternity. Arguably, this innovation also gives us the obligation to preserve documents forever. A price we have to pay for this achievement seems to be a lot more work. On the whole, I would say digital archiving means that we have at least twice the work we had in the analog era. Just two examples. For the foreseeable future, ethnomusicology archives have to preserve both the analog originals and their digital correlates, which more or less doubles the work for preservation and requires very different expertise. And another example, since the digital revolution, media formats have multiplied. In the old days, we basically had to deal with discs, tape, and occasionally exotic stuff like cylinders. Today, there are all kinds of technical media in digital formats, and we're archiving video, paper, photos, and more besides audio, all of which need long-term preservation, both physically and digitally. If I had time, I would make the same argument for the other areas like digital cataloging or access or outreach. So, the digital revolution has not only transformed all domains of archives, it has also multiplied the workload in each of these domains. As far as I can see, the funding for archives, however, has not kept pace with the technological development. For example, almost all ethnomusicology archives that I'm aware of have a slightly smaller staff today than they had in 1980. In response, several archives today offer more limited services than they did in the analog era. Some have stopped acquiring new collections altogether, or they collect a more limited range of recordings. Often there's a less person power available for documentation, research, outreach, or all of the above. Decision makers, those who decide where the money goes, seem to imply that rationalization will solve the mismatch between allocated resources and increased workload, and it certainly helps. But so far I see rationalization more in the dire sense of limiting resources. If things continue as they are now, future generations may well be able to leverage the full power of the digital archive. They will have easier access to well-connected and better documented multimedia collections, but a large part of what is presently stored at audiovisual cultural heritage will probably not survive to see this brave new world, unless perhaps we radically change how archives work in yet another revolution. So I don't want to stop here with this pessimistic outlook. The real question, of course, is what can we do today? Yeah? Let me just ask if we are communicating the current state of digitization in the best possible way to both decision makers and the public. Thank you for your attention.
Wow, thank you, panelists. I'm going to kick off Q&A with a question. When I was back at Penn State asking my digital archivist, not my personal digital archivist, but Penn State's, that would be pretty cool. I was talking to Penn State's digital archivist. I said, listen, I don't know this crowd. What could I possibly tell them that would be interesting? He said, nothing. Don't go talk to them. You're going to embarrass us. Please, don't do that. But I didn't listen to him. We had a really interesting discussion about maybe a tension between digitization and preservation, or rather of digitization as a preservation strategy. So with that conversation in mind and the 6 talks that you've just heard, I will also add a reflection that over the past 8 years or so, I've worked for 5 different institutions, which means that I've moved a lot more often than I wanted to, but it also means I have this interesting cross-section of different cultures at different institutions over a fairly short period of time. And what I've found is that all have had really active digitization programs, and yet they've had really a spectrum of digital preservation maturity. And so I'm wondering if our panel can explore this tension between digitization as a preservation strategy and the sort of infrastructure or capacity that you need to make good on preserving assets that have been digitized. Notice I'm not answering.
Well, I'll just say one thing. The Library of Congress, I think, has been perhaps fortunate in having, you know, reasonably extensive resources. They get smaller and smaller every year with the way the budget goes, but we've been at this for 20 or 25 years now, and it really did start with demonstrating the potency of access. You know, we had an American Memory Pilot project back in the 1990s, and it was still on CD-ROMs, the web wasn't mature yet or so on, but it at once, I think, showed the impact that was possible from those things. And preservation got drug along behind that to some degree. It's been interesting. My white hair will tell you I've been here that long. And what I observed sort of was two phenomena coming into play. One was that we were sort of secretly exploring preservation issues related to digital content in the background. Simple things like file naming and file naming structures that might be applied in a uniform way for our access copies. But the other process, which was, I think, a little bit, you know, in some of these other talks, is the attitudinal adjustments that were there. I remember vigorous discussions with people who strongly believed in microfilm and clung to microfilm, who were just negative and striking ways about scanning books or documents and so on. And we sneak, and that sort of come down, you know, after that crowd gave up a little bit, then we got the sound recordings who were still clinging to quarter-inch tape, and then they slowly gave up. Now it's the film on the film crowd that, you know, are sort of clinging, motion picture film. So you get this progressive attitudinal adjustment, I think, again, working with access as maybe a pathfinder that gets you more into it.
I could say something. Yeah, it's just the first time that I present and I come down a little bit more on the preservation side. Usually I talk more for access. Maybe a thing that that correlates to what you just said is that they're all connected. I mean, no archive works with any of these domains, and they correlate maybe more than one thinks. That access drives digitization, for example. My favorite example.
Yeah. Okay. So probably a little bit different perspective of the interconnection between digitization and preservation. When you deal with oral tradition, as in our case, then digitization is a very important form of preservation, because, as I told, we have about 80 versions of previous, centuries. But it is possible to digitize it, but you would never hear their voices. It's impossible to, revive them in an authentic form. And when you digitize the current version, you do a very unique form of preservation. You would allow next generations to hear their voices, their versions, their words, their poetry. So it's a very important form in our case when you are dealing with the epic, which goes like floating water.
I'll just speak a little bit about my experience in Hawaii working with all of the other organizations that participated in our pilot project. And everybody, for many, many decades, librarians and archivists and other caretakers of audiovisual materials in Hawaii realized that something had to be done, and something had to be done really quickly. And I think Alan's slide had the time frame of 10 to 15 years before the actual physical media would disintegrate. Well, in Hawaii, because of the salty air, the high temperatures, very high humidity, that time frame is even more urgent for us to work on the materials. And so when the pilot project first started, people were basically saying, well, how much can we give you? You know, how much are you able to actually digitize and store? Because one of the biggest challenges that all of these organizations had was not the understanding of what needed to occur, but the lack of resources, equipment, and storage space to do it individually in their own institutions. So one of the major accomplishments of the pilot project was able to work with the University of Hawaii to create a digital storage solution for now. I don't know how much longer it will be adequate for our collection materials, but that was a big selling point to make people confident to entrust their media materials to us, knowing that it would be preserved better or made accessible at least better than what they could provide within their own organizations.
At Indiana, we're in a university context, and that's not true for everyone out here, I know. For us, digital preservation has meant looking to the standards produced by a variety of organizations and looking at what other folks are doing and finding the place that we feel right about in terms of those standards and best practices. Within our context, it's this collaboration means giving up some control in order to maximize our preservation. So, we look, at Indiana, we have this very rich, robust technology infrastructure. There's a mass data storage system that present capacity right now is over 40 petabytes, and network speeds of 40 gigabit connections and more. So that capacity is there, but in order to utilize that, we have to really work with those units, give up some control, but at the same time trying to harness the energy in those areas. Those people have interest in, they've got the tools and the toys, and they want to use them for something interesting. Well, we've got something interesting. How do we work together? How can we do something for you? How can you do something for us? And so beyond the standards and the best practices, it's finding those other units, those interested parties, to make this happen, because we can't do it on our own. We cannot store them on hard drives in our own shop. That's not a way to preserve it long term. It's not a way of actively managing it in a way that is sustainable. So we have to look to these larger institutional structures and capacities, and in doing so, negotiating what we need. The mass data storage system has this enormous capacity, but there's not a preservation repository layer yet that we can use. So our work is to continually make this case and ensure that there will be, and there is a preservation repository layer and services that will serve what we hope to be, several 100,000 digitally preserved objects in the not so distant future. And that window of preservation is, these are all estimates, and they're going to vary from place to place. An institution like the Library of Congress that has a warehouse full of obsolete equipment that's bigger than this room, they've got a hedge against obsolescence, but we don't have that hedge. And when we go, we just had this conversation this past week looking to repair an old tape deck, and I can count the number of people we were talking to on the finger of one finger. There was this one person we were like, this is there are several situations where there is one person or two people who can repair this kind of head or make these styli. The obsolescence curve has only gotten steeper, and it's not to be too gloom and doom, but it's critical. And perhaps a question to throw out to all of you is, where are you at with your preservation strategies, and where do you stand? What are you thinking about right now? What will you do?
So with that, I think we're opening up to the floor. Either you can address Alan's question or ask questions of your own.
I have a question over here. So, Mike, I really appreciated how you were talking about community and trying to find people that you can rely on for collective wisdom. And I was wondering if the panel could talk about the communities that they have found to support their work in digital preservation, including for those in the States, if you've worked with the National Digital Stewardship Alliance and NDIP here at the Library of Congress, or if there's something like that internationally that you guys have worked with as well.
I talked a lot about the communities that we use. I guess I would, or that we work with. I guess I would add to that we've had some connection with the National Digital Stewardship Alliance, though we didn't have an existing relationship, as far as I know, with NDIP before that. I think one of the conversations that we had right before I came out here was about the emerging Digital Preservation Network, or DPN, or DEEPN, I believe, initiative. That's another community of, I think, 50 plus, someone can correct me, institutions that have signed on for a network of repositories, essentially. So if you have a repository or a storage layer that preserves your assets, there would be another huge national layer beneath that, so that if your repository fails, if your institution fails, if your town somehow gets wiped off the face of the map, you have not only other versions of your assets replicated with partners, but also there's a legal framework for those to be what they called brightened, so that other institutions could give access. So I think that's going to be, that DPN is really kind of coming along right now. It'll be interesting to see what community aspects the DEEPN and related initiatives will offer.
Are you ready for your next question? In fact, it was actually to you. I'm Anna Ferriello. I'm at Western Carolina University, and I just was interested in your comment about people clinging to past technologies. And this is really a comment more about access. I feel like with our digital collections, we have totally won over the public. The public is all about what we are doing. But within my own institution, my greatest obstacles seem to be other librarians who kind of haven't come along and are clinging to past ways of doing things. And I wonder if you might want to comment on that kind of sort of unexpected resistance.
Well, I'm not sure if I can add to what I said before, which was jocular and a little bit unkind to my colleagues. There was, I think, and perhaps still is, a received wisdom in conventional preservation departments. You know, we have one in this library that has evolved, and I think there are others in other big institutions. And like all communities, to use that term, you know, they have an ethos and, you know, a belief system and so on that guides them. And these are folks, I think, who were, you know, worked very hard in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and so on, you know, doing the right things in the right way and developing standards. There's quite elaborate standards for microfilming, as you may know, you know, and so there's, again, a kind of a received wisdom. And I found with the audio, and Jean Deanna will remember some of this, you know, when we were planning, I joined you to plan Culpeper a little bit in an earlier chapter of my life. There really was a period there where there was this problem of breaking free of analog copies of sound recordings for preservation, you know, and it was driven partly by the diminished availability of the media, but there were other things. And it sort of was a question of what I think we did as part of Culpeper planning, to say, okay, folks, you know, the time has come, you know, wake up, smell the coffee, you know, the digital age is here, it's time to switch. But there was still some resistance and so on. As I say, it's been fun to see it because I now get that voice in motion picture film, you know, where people are still strongly attached to that. I don't know, I mean, it's, again, you know, it's values dissonance and beliefs dissonance that happens, and you know, one tries to preach the sermon, but sometimes you have to wait for the congregation to age out and a new congregation to come in.
We encountered some of this. I assume it's related when we were building Scholarsphere. And I guess I would share 3 potential strategies. One of them is, this is the naive one, win them over. So people challenge you, or people express skepticism, or they doubt that you're going to be successful. Use that to drive you. Be successful. Throw it back in their faces and hope to win them over. You know, show them your brilliance and your drive and your ability. The second strategy would be to work around them. This is kind of like the reality show strategy. You make your alliances. Be strategic about the alliances that you make, and maybe you can gerrymander them into a corner of obsolescence. And then is this being recorded? And then the third one, I'm forgetting, but the third one is ignore them. I mean, if they want to be bitter over in the corner and sulk and doubt and drag down the institution, then let them do that and be the better person. Wait till they themselves are obsolete.
Actually, one other thought occurs to me, and I'm inspired by Maurice's talk. There is an aspect of the maturity of the digital preservation enterprise. So, again, my lack of fair play with the folks who cling to microfilm it wasn't entirely the fact that they saw a problem with the digital imaging. In fact, in many cases, especially when you start seeing color, you know, you can see how it is a better reproduction of an original thing. There was this worry that we all still have that the digital entities won't be long-lived, you know, and that the structures that folks like you were building aren't fully trustworthy to keep the content alive over time. And that underlies, I think, some of the anxiety, again, not reproduction quality, but that. And there, I think time is on our side, you know, as these repository systems, or at least fragmented parts of repository systems, do succeed in keeping content alive for a generation or two, everybody's confidence level goes up. I used to point out here that we took our card catalog and digitized it in the 1970s, roughly speaking. And in fact, it's gone through one huge migration from the home-built mainframe system into the Endeavour/Voyager system we now use for the ILS. And so you had 30 to 40 years in which this very large digital resource, our catalog, you know, migrated successfully, first from analog to digital and then through a digital migration. And I would always say that, hoping it would build confidence, you know, in the success of these systems.
This question is for Janel. You mentioned that you try to follow best practices but implemented them according to the special conditions of your environment. And I was wondering if you could give some examples of that, and also if there were times where you had to fudge best practices based upon the realities you were faced with.
Well, when I say that we followed best practices as much as we could, the project was lucky enough for the first year to have a project consultant who actually, and I did not mention this in my talk, but he spent a year in Hawaii interviewing different repositories, different collection managers, and different caretakers of audiovisual material, basically first to find out what was out there and what preservation needs all of these different organizations had. And part of his project consulting included an implementation plan in order to build an archive to address these issues, because up until this point, Hawaii did not have one organization that was solely dedicated to audiovisual materials. Each like I said, all of the partner organizations, all of the libraries each had their own collections and were trying to do the best that they could on their own. And this was the first time that there was a collaborative effort to kind of centralize those activities with one organization. And so when I came on board, I tried the best I could to follow that implementation plan, starting with creating a digital preservation strategy, the types of target files that we wanted to create from each analog source. So we followed federal guidelines. We also followed standards learned from different organizations that teach video and audiovisual preservation, like Bay Area Video Coalition. And so we determined that for as much as we could, we would try to create 10-bit uncompressed QuickTime movie files as our preservation copy, as well as lower resolution and streaming quality files, and realized very quickly that we were going to run out of storage space. And so after the pilot project, we kind of regrouped and looked again at what our target files were going to be for the digital files. And right now we have modified it slightly to take into consideration the source format that is being digitized. We realized that a lot of the materials in our collection were composite analog sources like 3/4 inch U-matic that weren't not necessarily, image quality was not necessarily being improved by capturing it at an uncompressed rate. So for those source formats, we decided not to go fully uncompressed with those in order to maximize the storage space that was allocated to us on the university servers, because that became another realization very quickly, is that up front they said, oh yeah, you'll 30 terabytes. And then when we filled that up, they said, oh, you used that already? That was supposed to last you, for years and years. So so that was just one example of how we had to modify the original strategies that we started out with in the pilot project. And then just one other thing really quickly, in terms of physical environment, that was another huge issue that we realized very quickly in the pilot project, is that the physical condition of many of the items that we are working with, well, I guess as a way to convey this, when people would come to me, my heart would sink when they would say, oh, I want to donate these. They've been on my lanai for the past 30 years. And I knew, right then that it would be a huge, huge challenge, even if we were even going to be able to recover the media that was on there. So that changed our priorities drastically. We decided our priorities at first were going to be based on uniqueness of content, but very quickly turned to physical condition and the degree of deterioration that we were seeing.
Okay, and that's the time that we have. Please, if you have any existing.
No, because Ahmed came all this way, and I just wanted to ask him one quick question. So, Ahlan wa sahlan, Ahmed, and I want to thank you for coming. And just one quick question is, there's been a library in Alexandria since ancient times, one of the great 7 wonders of the world. And I know that there's a very long tradition of Arabic manuscripts and the beautiful illuminated manuscripts. I was just wondering if people back home, do they see digitization as a continuity of that great history of Egypt, or do people have ambivalent feelings?
Okay, at Bibliotheca Alexandrina, Lab of Alexandria, we simply complete the mission of the old library with its all concepts, targets. Yeah, the main target even for the old library is preservation, but with the techniques, old techniques, Burdette files, stones, whatever technology being used right now. Today, if you want really to preserve anything, it should be digital. digitize your collections, your items, and okay, it will live for thousands of years. Simply would be migrated from platform to platform to media, from media, whatever. But I am sure any digitized object right now would live forever. This is something.
Thank you. Thank you for coming,
All right.
especially for our guests far away.
Thank you to my fellow panelists.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.